Without objection, amendment number 1 withdrawn. Next amendment, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, no further amendments.
Representative Fritz, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Senate Bill 1443, good morning, members. This legislation does four things, basically. It gives parents access to all surveys, analyses, and evaluations, and requires that they give written, informed consent in order for a minor student to participate. This does not apply, I say again, does not apply to surveys, analysis, and/or evaluations if they are being given to determine the effectiveness of instruction or curriculum. Secondly, the bill requires an LEA to obtain written, informed consent before the minor student can participate in health services, with the exception of the following screenings: vision, hearing, blood pressure, and dental. Number 3, the bill requires that the parent or legal guardian to provide written, informed consent prior to the minor student participating in gender identity or sexual orientation curriculum. Students who do not have permission to participate in these classes shall not be penalized for the grading purposes. And fourthly, parents must provide written consent prior to a minor student participating in a club or organization. Why is this needed? There's a growing trend within many schools to presume that parents or guardians are not going to be involved in their children's lives. The House has passed several pieces of legislation this year. We have passed those, increasing expectations in our educational realm. We passed HB 437, third grade literacy. We passed 322, physical security in our schools. House Bill 329 are raising expectations for teacher salaries. And House Bill 843, the appropriateness of materials. We must also hold to higher expectations for our parental rights and the interface with the LEA. In trying to accommodate the lack of involvement by some parents, we have taken away the fundamental rights of many parents. With that, Mr. Speaker, I renew my motion.
Representative Fritz renews this motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was once a member of Education Administration Committee, and I heard this bill, and I'm even more troubled by the explanation given by Representative Fritz today than I was in committee. This bill is about preemptively trying to censor education. It's putting more work on our teachers to submit their lesson plans, their surveys, any activities to parents for approval. And it's under the guise that we want parent involvement. We want to hear what parents think. But the truth is, if this body really cared about what parents think, we would listen to the thousands of parents calling on us to pass common sense gun laws.
Representative Jones, once again, that is out of order. You're moving on a different topic. You're supposed to stay on the topic of the bill. So this is your last chance. From this point forward, any rule out order, we will move to the next speaker. Representative Jones.
Mr. Speaker, this is about how parents can opt their children out of any type of activity or things that occur at school. I'm trying to figure out how can we opt our children out of being victims of mass shootings. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Jones, out of order. Representative Shaw, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sponsor yield.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely, sir.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to ask you if, thank God we don't, and if I do, I don't know, and you probably don't either, but if you had a child who were having some problems with their self-identity in terms of sexual orientation, would you not want them to come to you first before they would go to anyone else? And I know what you're saying, they have to come to you first, but would you not want them to feel comfortable to come to you as a parent and talk to you before they talk to anyone else?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the question. This bill is not about confused children. This bill is about parental rights.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe I'm missing something, but that's what I see in the legislation. You're saying that they would couldn't go to anyone without parental consent certain things, and one of those things would be sexual orientation. So I think what I'm saying is, if I had a son or daughter, God forbid, I don't think I have, but if I had one, I'd want them to feel comfortable to come to me where I could instruct them and help them to go to the right persons to get the counseling that they needed. And I think that your legislation could prevent that from happening if we're not careful. How do you respond to that, sir?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again for the question. But this legislation deals with what the child can be instructed in school and requires the parent to opt in for those topics. That's simply all it does. It requires that opt-in.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sometimes the child, as you know, will have more confidence in the teacher than they will the parents in some cases, because, you know, as parents, we are going to always teach our kids the right thing and put the hammer down and say, don't do this and don't do that, when sometimes they will go to their teachers and express themselves about things that they don't feel comfortable to come to us. So to me, I think the legislation is hindering us from having those kind of relationships with our children, where I think I know what you mean and what you're trying to do, but I really believe that that is going to maybe cause some division between the parent and the student in some cases. I just wanted to get that on record. I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't think this is a good idea. I want my child to be able to express his or herself to whomever they feel comfortable to do that, first and foremost, and then moving to whatever counseling we need to help them. Thank you for listening.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative, for that great question. And I do hold again that this only affects the instructional mechanism in our schools and requires that parental opt-in. It does not negate anything that you just offered.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Fritz, I've enjoyed getting to know you this year. I really disagree with this piece of legislation, and there are a couple of questions I have, and then I'd like to make a comment. So you're requiring a parent to opt in to sexual orientation instruction. I'm not sure I understand what sexual orientation instruction is, and if you could answer that.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill is pretty clear. You can read through the bill. It gives very specific examples of what is required for that learning. It's those two topic areas. However, it does require the same opt-in by parents for other clubs and organizations within the school. This bill is written upon the foundation that God gave the children to the parents, not the state of Tennessee. And he did not give them to the United States. He gave them to the children, or to the parents. And it is the parents' incumbent responsibility to play an active role in that education. This opt-in policy simply does that. It does not prevent the parent from allowing their child to be instructed in any area. It simply requires an opt-in. Now, there are exceptions for the health screening that I read over that we had reached agreement that seemed to be common sense to leave them as opt-out, but the rest of it's opt-in.
Representative Freeman.
Yeah, and I guess that the thing that bothers me is that once again, we are giving the appearance that talking about gender identity or LGBTQ sexuality is somehow wrong, and I have an issue with that. And the big issue is, we go to school to we go to school to learn and to challenge what our norms are. I wasn't a big history fan. I didn't necessarily like science. I would have loved to have been able to opt out, but I am who I am because my teachers pushed me and challenged me. When you go to college, you get your worldview challenged. Where I grew up, I had my bubble of friends and influence. When I went to college and when I went to high school, those norms were pushed. I got to meet people from other cultures, people that had a different background, people that had a different sexuality. And us limiting that is limiting the students' growth. And I'm afraid that this legislation will just further that. And again, I would love your direct answer, if you can give it, on why you believe discussing a member of the LGBTQ community's sexuality is so dangerous that we need to allow parents to opt them out of it, but yet not opt out of math or science.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative, I've also enjoyed getting to know you this year, so thank you so much, and I appreciate your comments. But I think you've just made the point of what I'm trying to do here, because you use the word allow the parents. And that comes from a statist belief that we, the state of Tennessee, somehow have authority over those parental rights. Our nation was not founded on that. The godly principles of which we have built this nation and our founding fathers do not support that view of allowing parents to do things. And our Supreme Court decisions have not been consistent with that view. I will offer you this. In 1997, the Supreme Court declared the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects the fundamental right of parents, I say again parents, to direct the care, upbringing, and education of their children. So I would offer you, Representative, this is simply in compliance with what has been our law, our Supreme Court decisions, and the basis of which this nation was founded. Secondarily, I would offer in 2000, the court declared that, and I quote, the liberty interests of parents in the care, custody, and control of their children is perhaps the oldest of the fundamental liberty interests recognized by the court. So again, I appreciate your comments, and it is good getting to know you.
Representative Johnson and Knox.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think we've clarified, just to make sure, this bill requires opting in rather than allowing opting out. Is that correct?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. Yes, ma'am, opt in on most things. There are a few opt-out, as those that I just read, Representative, regarding the health screenings.
Representative Johnson.
Okay, so by requiring parents who have no problem with the instruction and the curriculum that this body has approved, you are stepping on those parents' right by requiring them to opt in. I don't understand why those few parents who disagree with our curriculum and our instruction, I'm not sure what you think is being taught, but I'm pretty sure that maybe if some folks went and spent some time in classrooms, they would see what is actually being taught. And so I think you're stepping on the rights of parents who are okay with the instruction in our public schools and with the curriculum that this body approved, and requiring an opt-in from folks who have no issue with it. That seems to me to be stepping on their rights.
Representative Johnson, was that a question?
Do you see it as stepping on those parents' right? Why do we not have an opt-out, which we've always had, rather than requiring every single parent to opt in?
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, ma'am, for the question. And I would question your use of the word always. It has been a relatively recent thing that we decided that we were going to instruct in any topic that the parent did not give permission to. Many of us are of the same age group that the parents had to approve of whatever we learned in our schools outside the base curriculum, anything that we participated in clubs and groups. So I would question your use of the word always or your definition of always. And I do not think at all we're stepping on the rights of parents. Again, this bill simply requires that for most things, there is an opt-in by the parent. I think that is consistent with what we have done in raising expectations in this good body for how we educate and make Tennessee the very best schools in this entire nation. That is my objective, I assure you, that everyone around these United States would look to the schools in this great state of Tennessee as the very best. I think that's very much achievable. And I think that setting these high expectations that we have set over this session and sessions prior to are the right ways to do that.
Representative Johnson.
Do you have any data to suggest that this bill is going to improve? Is there any research on that? Because, you know, I am with you 100% on making Tennessee the best schools in the country. And the way you do that is by funding great programs and fully funding public education and not privatizing education. And the idea that this is going to be a nightmare for educators as far as the opt-in. It would be so much easier to track parents who opt out than requiring every parent to opt in. If you've been in a classroom and you've seen a lot of students that struggle to get things back to class and parents who are working 2 and 3 jobs that struggle to get things back. So the reality is the opt-out it's a much better solution.
Representative Fritz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for your input. I appreciate that. I would draw on one word that you used there, Representative. You referred to it being easier. Life and my experience has taught me that the path of ease is not the path to excellence. And so sometimes it requires us to take that steeper path. Sometimes it requires us to stand up and do the right things. Sometimes it requires us to take on those challenges for norms that we have allowed to filter themselves into our society that weaken our society. Sometimes it requires us to stand up and do the right thing. And sometimes that requirement is making sure that our parents are engaged in this process of learning and that they opt in. Again, I don't think the easier path is the right path. I think most of my good teachers in my district do not choose the easy path. I think they embrace challenge because they're committed to Roane and Loudoun counties, putting out the very best kids in the great state of Tennessee. So thank you for your input. I appreciate what you have to say.
Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I call previous question.
Previous question been called. Objection. There's objection. We're voting. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye. When the bell rings, those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 74, 25 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 1443 as amended, vote aye. When the bell rings, those opposed, vote no. As every member voted, does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye, 74, 24 nays.
Senate Bill 1443, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed by objection. The most reconsidered is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that brings the body back to item 28 of Monday's calendar. Senate Bill 927 by Chairman Hulsey, relative to inmates infected with bloodborne pathogens.
Chairman Hulsey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to substitute and conform to Senate Bill 927.
Chairman Hulsey moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion on Senate Bill 927.
Chairman Hulsey moves substitute and conform to Senate Bill 927, probably second without objection. So ordered. Chairman Hulsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To clear some of this up and some of the confusion, legal did say that the way the bill's written, it's somewhat convoluted, but they assured me that when meds are funded by the federal or state funds, then the county has no duty to pay for it. In other words, that money's coming in, so now they can relax. It does not remove their responsibility of providing this medication if there is no money. And of course, that's the intent of the bill anyway.
Representative Pearson, I think that was your question. Does that answer your question from prior? All right, thank you. All right. Chairman Halsey renews his motion. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Pearson.
Thank you for talking to legal and chatting about that with me, because that was definitely a concern that I had. What I also want to know is, looking at the fiscal note for this bill, it talks about the Ryan White Fund. Could you talk a little bit about what that fund is and how the dollars are currently allocated?
Chairman Halsey.
I'm not positive about the complete allocation, but Ryan Fund White money comes from the federal government. There has been some changes in that by the executive branch of our government. I don't know all the details about that. I do know that there is a plan to substitute state money in for some of that, and that's why the wording was changed. And some of it is allocated for prevention, some of it's allocated for treatment, some of it's allocated for education. But that's the whole purpose, was to open up an avenue that counties can maybe find some relief for this medication.
Representative Pearson.
Yeah, and this is the challenge, and well, I believe one question was answered. The challenge that I have is the Ryan White Fund and all that it does, which I believe is really important work. It's still only about $26 million, so it's not extraordinary. $9 million from the federal government to deal with HIV prevention and education. And the reason this is an important issue for me, I'm in Shelby County, which has the third highest rate of transmission for HIV in the country. And so the monies going into this work are really important. And the concern that I have is that we will have our jails, which incarcerate people, have a responsibility for those folks, using dollars for instance, from the Ryan White Fund, which funds a myriad of organizations or people who are not incarcerated, drawing down on the money from the general population through the Ryan White Fund, instead of us paying, or those counties paying, the cost of care for the people they're incarcerating. Is there, how are we preventing that from happening and not using a fund that's supposed to deal with the HIV epidemic in the state of Tennessee to going directly to to prisons?
Chairman Halsey.
I can't solve that. And I can't say that somebody with HIV outside the jail is more important than somebody with HIV in the jail. So I can't solve that for you.
Representative Pearson.
I don't want you to think that there's, for some reason, a value, a life judgment that we're making. We're talking about where the resources come from. And right now, the counties are paying for the resources for people who are incarcerated, and the Ryan White Fund is open more to the general public. I believe a potential fix, right, is more resources going to counties to help fund the folks who are incarcerated, our citizens who are incarcerating, and getting their support. But the worry here is that the money that today is going, is in a fund to go to a larger group of people, is now going to just be going directly to prisons, because our counties or the state don't want to pay for those costs. And so there has to be a way, and I would hope we can find a way to meet the needs within the prison and with our incarcerated citizens' health, as well as the folks outside of it. Not taking $9 million obviously is an executive branch problem, but for us in this legislative body, helping to replenish those funds and increase those funds, however it needs to be done, is a remedy I think we need to consider, because this is a serious problem. But I don't think taking away money from Peter to pay Paul is the way to do it, if you will.
Chairman Halsey.
Thank you. And I understand what you're saying. I just can't solve it. I'm just trying to find an avenue that jails can find some financial relief, and I don't know that they would get all that they need out of this anyway, but I'm just trying to find a way to help them. With that, I renew my motion.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, Chairman Halsey, I believe your intent here is well-meaning. My concern is that under current law, those county legislative bodies have the responsibility to provide all that medical care in those jails. And here we're saying they don't have to do it for medication for HIV-positive patients. And I understand the desire to shift that burden over to the federal government or the state government. So my question then is, since you have amended this legislation and shifted it to the state or federal government, do we have that funding in this year's budget? Is that funding specifically provided for this purpose or contemplated by the budget that we're going to vote on later today or this week?
Chairman Holsey.
I understand it. Yes, it is.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my concern there is I know that the governor has said he's going to put X amount of dollars to replace that federal funding, but I believe the Ryan White funding was well in excess of that 8.3, give or take, $1 million. And that Ryan White funding is what was used to fund this medication in the jails. So are you 100% sure that that funding is available in this year's budget to fill in this hole to the jails? Because if it's not, now we're excluding it from the local government's responsibility, putting it in the state's responsibility. We're denying those federal funds, but the state might not have that money to even do it. So now the unintended consequence of your legislation may be that that HIV medication is not going to be available at all. That's my sole concern. And so I would like assurance that that money is going to be in this budget.
Chairman Holsey.
As I understand it, if we vote for this budget and pass it, that money is in there. There's a portion of that in there. I do not know the exact amount. At the end of the day, in my county, right now I have 2 inmates that are HIV. It costs the county, Sullivan County Sheriff's Department, $7,000 a month for that. Let's say they apply and can only get a $2,000 relief on that. They're still responsible for the other $5,000 to make sure that the medication is served. They still have that statute responsibility to do that. So however you shift the money around, if there's no money for them to get, there's no money for them to get. This is the only door I know that would open for them to get some.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I believe you have information that says how much money in Ryan White funding our state got last year.
Chairman Holsey.
That is correct. I believe it was 22.4 million, I think, maybe 26.4 million.
He's trying to get you the answer. Hang on. Chairman Holsey.
Yes, in this proposed budget, we're putting 26.5 million reoccurring to replace.
Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's the number I was looking for. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, Speaker. To the sponsor, there's a constitutional obligation for the jails or prisons to provide medical care, correct?
Chairman Holsey.
That is correct.
Representative Hardaway.
So it really doesn't matter. It does matter, but in the great scheme of things, no matter where they have to get the money, the inmates will receive adequate medical care.
Chairman Holsey.
And thank you, sir. I appreciate your analytical thought all the time. You are exactly correct.
All right, Representative Hardaway.
Thank you, sir.
Representative Zachary, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Move previous question.
Previous question be called. Any objection? Seeing none, we're voting. All those in favor of Senate Bill 927 as amended, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Holsey's aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 94, 5 nays.
Senate Bill 927 having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare passed without objection. The motion for reconsider is tabled. Call up next bill, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes Monday's regular calendar, but if I may, Mr. Speaker, remind the members, 2 of those bills were rolled to the heel of the regular calendar 1 that was set for today. So if you printed any material, please save that material for those bills when they come up at the end of regular calendar 1 for today.
Leader Lambert, you're recognized. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We could take up the House message calendar.
Without objection, Mr. Clerk, call it first message.
Item 1, House Bill 92 by Representative Gillespie relative to traffic safety. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 92 for Senate Bill 201, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 92 as amended.
Representative Gillespie, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, what this amendment does is we're renaming or naming the bill. This was the move over bill that I carried up on the floor a couple weeks ago to the Jabari DeBailey bill. For those of you all that know Mr. DeBailey, he was hit several years ago by a motorist while stranded on the side of the road and lost one of his legs and was unable to attend a football scholarship. And so we're basically calling this move over bill and naming it after him. With that, I move to concur with Senate Amendment number 1.
Representative Gillespie moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1 vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. As every member voted, as any member wish to change their vote. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 95, no nays, 1 present, non-voting.
Senate Amendment number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. Most read series table. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 160 by Speaker Pro Tem Marsh relative to alcoholic beverages. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 160 for Senate Bill 161, adopted Amendment 1, and passed House Bill 160 as amended.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Amendment 1, which adds some penalties to the, if the servers do certain penalties, they still have to wait out 8 years to get their liquor license back. With that, I move previous question. I renew my motion. Please.
Speaker Pro Tem Marsh moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1 vote aye when the bell rings. All those opposed vote no. As every member voted, as any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 96, nays, 2 present, non-voting.
Senate Amendment number 1, having received a constitutional majority, I hereby declare concurred in without objection. Most read series table. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 322 by Chairman White and others relative to education. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 322 for Senate Bill 274, adopted Amendments 2, 3, and 4, and passed House Bill 322 as amended.
Chairman White, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What we're on this is a school safety bill we passed on the House floor 2 weeks ago, come tomorrow. The Senate added just a couple new things, which I do agree with. If you remember the part whenever a school system has to build a new building or remodel, some of the procedures we had for that, they added that also they want to add that the new remodeling or the new building have entry-resistant or bullet-resistant film on the windows and glass doors and on the first floor of the buildings, and they also had to have camera systems that monitor the entrances and hallways. The second part they wanted to add was it means to move the submission date of private school safety plans to October 1st, and also allow private schools to determine whether or not the students participate in the drills, and clarifies that results of the drills conducted by private schools are only required to go to local law enforcement and not Tennessee Department of Education and TDOS. Just for clarity, if you remember, there were three parts in there that the schools had to have an an armed intruder drill, an incident command drill, and a bus safety. It said that the students need to be present in the armed intruder and not necessarily present in the incident command and the bus safety. And we're letting the private schools determine whether or not they can be present, students present or not. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I concur with Senate Amendments number 2, 3, and 4.
Chairman White moves to concur in Senate Amendments 2, 3, and 4, properly seconded. Any discussion on the amendments? Representative Pearson.
Thank you, sponsor, and for the amendments also from the Senate version. But again, I think these are not addressing the issues that a lot of parents and people in our community are here about today as it relates to making our community safer and making our schools safer. Yesterday, I had the opportunity, along with other colleagues, to meet parents at Covenant. And one of the things they said that this legislation and these amendments don't address is what happens when their children are on playgrounds. There's no locks there. This legislation is a false solution to a real problem of an epidemic of gun violence and a proliferation of weapons of war in our communities. And this legislation isn't holistically addressing the experiences of the children in our schools in a way that would actually make them safer, because it doesn't deal with the root issue, which isn't having more bulletproof windows, as the Senate amendment says, or having locked doors and new public infrastructure that we'll sponsor. That isn't it. It's the fact that human beings and individuals can have access to assault weapons and weapons of war in our communities. And that's what we need to be addressing.
Chairman White.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Much appreciated. Renew my motion.
Representative Warner, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? There's objection. We're voting. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 72, 23 nays.
Previous question prevails. We are voting. All those in favor of Senate Amendments 2, 3, and 4, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 86, 11 nays.
Senate Amendment 2, 3, and 4 having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. The motion for reconsider is tabled. Call up next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 413 by Leader Lamberth and others, relative to probation and parole. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 413 for Senate Bill 495, adopted Amendment 1, passed House Bill 413 as amended.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to concur in Senate Amendment number 1.
Leader Lamberth moves to concur in Senate Amendment number 1, probably seconded. Any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, any objection? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Leader, would you explain the amendment for me? Would you explain that amendment?
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. So the amendment that the Senate put on would allow for law enforcement officers that have a certain amount of experience to be able to be hired as probation officers without fitting other criteria because of their experience. There was a broader provision in there that would allow virtually anyone that had armed forces experience to be able to do the same thing. And I'm assuming the other body did not feel like all of those experiences matched up as well with what just law enforcement experiences are for purposes of becoming a probation officer. The way we first put the bill forward would have, but the main goal was to try to at least expand the amount of folks that can be probation officers. This does it, not quite as far as I'd like to, but it at least gets the job done.
All right, any further discussion? Seeing none, any objection to the question? Seeing none. All those in favor of Senate Amendment number 1, vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Barrett, aye. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 96, no nays, 1 present, not voting.
Senate Amendment 1, having received the constitutional majority, I hereby declare it concurred in without objection. Motion reconsider is tabled. Call next bill, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 988 by Representative Beck, relative to landlord and tenant. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate refused to recede from its adoption of Amendment number 1.
Representative Beck, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to refuse to recede from the actions of the House in non-concurring in the Senate Amendment number 1, and that a conference committee be appointed to confer on like committees from the Senate to resolve the differences between the two bodies.
Representative Beck moves to refuse to receive from our action non-concurring Senate Amendment Number 1, and that a conference committee be appointed to confer with a like committee from the Senate to resolve the differences between the two bodies. Properly seconded. Without objection, motion carries. I appoint the following members: Representative Beck, Representative Whitson, Representative Hawk, Representative Farmer, Representative Love. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1217 by Chairman Zachary relative to public funds and financing. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate substituted House Bill 1217 for Senate Bill 1459, adopted Amendments 1 and 2, and passed House Bill 1217 as amended.
Chairman Zachary, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to non-concur in Senate Amendment Number 1 and 2.
Without objection, we non-concur. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 1342 by Representative Vaughn relative to economic and community development. Mr. Speaker, on April 13, 2023, the Senate refused to receive from its adoption of Amendments 1 and 2.
Chairman Vaughn, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I move to refuse to recede from our action in non-concurrent in Senate Amendments Number 1 and 2, and that you appoint a conference committee to confer with a like committee from the Senate to resolve the differences between our two bodies.
Chairman Vaughn moves to refuse to receive from our action non-concurring Senate Amendment Number 1 and 2, and that a conference committee be appointed to confer with a like committee from the Senate to resolve the differences between the two bodies. Properly seconded. Without objection, motion carries. I appoint the following members: Representatives Vaughn, Vital, Todd, and Shaw. Next message, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that completes the message calendar.
Representative Hardaway, for what purpose?
Thank you, Speaker. I want to ask Chairman Vaughn if that's the bill with the Orange Mound Industrial Development Corporation.
Representative Vaughn.
To my beloved colleague from Shelby County, I would ask that a conference committee of he and I step outside to resolve that difference.
Leader Lamberth, you're recognized.
Yes, sir, Mr. Speaker. I would make a motion at this juncture that we stand in recess until 2:30 today.
Without objection, we're in recess till 2:30 p.m. today.